caucus who are uncomfortable with this vote when it comes because they're from Trump-carried districts, and that puts them in some political jeopardy. She may have the votes anyway, but I can understand why she's trying to keep them in line.
From the New York Times, quote, paying attention to the impeachment inquiry and other developments means having to figure out what is true, false, or spin. Many Americans are throwing up their hands and tuning it all out. Is that possible, and what do you make of it coming from the New York Times, Brit?
Well, that sounds like it's probably correct. I think people look at this in wonder. And the reason I think, Mike, is that, impeachment is supposed to be reserved for the gravest of offenses,
right? Because
it is such a drastic step. And people look at the evidence here, which seems to some extent at least ambiguous. I think a lot of people look at this and say, well, yeah, he shouldn't have brought up Biden on that phone call, and he really shouldn't be trying to get a foreign government to investigate one of his political opponents, and he shouldn't be indicating that he might hold up aid because of it. But when you get down to it, the aid was not in the end withheld, and the investigation he wanted was not undertaken, and it sort of softens the whole picture. And people think, impeachment, for that, I don't really like Trump, but that seems awfully harsh to me. And I think that's something that Democrats have to be concerned about, that it seems like an awfully drastic measure to take in the face of what we know happened and what, in the end, didn't happen.
Right. Here's a sample of how Republican Chris Stewart handled the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine.
Do you have any information regarding the President of the United States accepting any bribes?
No.
Do you have any information regarding any criminal activity that the President of the United States has been involved with at all?
No.
Looking ahead tomorrow, it's Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, one of 4 witnesses as we start a new week of testimony, someone who listened in on the president's call. How do you expect Republicans to handle him?
Well, I think they'll probably handle him to some extent in the same way they handled Ambassador Yovanovitch, and which is to say that they will be careful with him. It'll depend, of course, on how he comes across. If he comes across as sort of a decent guy who was trying to do the right thing as he saw it and had a passionate interest in Ukraine where he had roots, then they'll be careful with him. But that exchange that you just played with the ambassador goes to the heart of this in this sense, and people say, well, the House can impeach for whatever it wants, and on paper that's true,
right.
And as a constitutional matter that's correct, but as a practical political matter, given the fact that the Constitution mentions treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors, I think people expect that it ought to be something pretty big and probably something criminal,
right.
And so when you get acknowledgments that nothing criminal has occurred, that certainly does help the defense of the president.
Then the headliner on Wednesday is Ambassador Gordon Sondland. How critical is he as someone who has spoken directly with the president?
Well, they haven't had anybody who really could testify to what the president said himself very effectively so far. So he presumably could do that, and he might do the president some harm here. You have to make some further adjustments in what he's testified to, and he might get embarrassed by that. But Mike, let's assume for the sake of discussion that the witnesses turn out to be dynamite, and they establish that the President of the United States indicated to the Ukrainians that he was not going to provide aid unless they undertook an investigation. An investigation in the end was not undertaken, and aid was ultimately forthcoming. So the question then becomes, even if they make their best case, is that going to convince enough Republicans in the House, and much more importantly, Republicans in the Senate,
right,
to go against their president? They would need, assuming all Democrats in the Senate vote to convict the president, they would need, 20 Republicans. That's about 40% of the Republican caucus. They got a long way to go to get there.
No doubt about it. Brit Hume, always fascinating. Thanks for your time, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
The Salvation Army accused of being